Hello everyone, welcome to another podcast. My name is Ben Lister. Welcome to episode 28 of the Chatbox podcast today with radio legend Jonathan Gold. Here we go.
Hello everyone, welcome to another Chatterbox podcast. It's episode 29. How are you doing today? Right, let's crack on. As you know, each week I have a guest to talk about their career or their job. So let's crack on with this week's guest. It's broadcaster Jonathan Gold. Hello Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm good, Ben. Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast.
That's good. 5 questions about broadcasting and radio, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, let's go for it. Question 1, you ready?
Go on.
Question 1, where did you start your broadcast career?
Okay, let's go right back. I started doing hospital radio in your area, in Driffield, the East Riding General Hospital, when I was the grand old age of 11. Probably sounded horrifically bad on the radio as well. And apparently I've still got some tapes lying around, but they can stay hidden. So I did that. I did work experience at Radio Air in Leeds because my cousin knew one of the presenters. So that was my first step into professional radio. And then I joined the local RSL, as it was called then, in Wakefield, Energy Radio, which was a 28-day restricted service license, which we did over the summer and Christmas. That got me my demo tape together, which then I started applying for stations when I left university. My first professional gig, I was doing overnight for MFM Marcher in Wrexham, which is now a Heart. So I was doing shows for them. I got to do cover work for Stray in Harrogate, and then they offered me the evening show back in '96. So I literally left university on the Friday and started radio full time on the Monday evening. I was there for about 6 months, and East Anglian Radio, which was part of Broadland and SGR in Ipswich, Colchester, offered me a show for the Network Late Show. So I joined that station. And then I moved around. I've done Comprod, made adverts of the Bay in Lancaster. I've worked for Juice in Liverpool, a station producer and presenter. I've also worked in Ireland for 10 years, in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, running stations, and been all over the place, really. So it was literally starting off from hospital radio and working into kind of RSL radio, then into full-time radio.
Wow, what a start to your career.
Been all over the place and travelled. My whole life is sometimes in the back of the car.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And also, it's good. Did you work at the top of the St. John's Beacon in Liverpool?
No, that was our competitors, Radio City. We were slightly below the Beacon on a dodgy street in Liverpool with a lot of bars and clubs were. And Juice was a great station. It was like a watered-down version of Galerxy. We were live from nightclubs every night. The studios were horrifically bad. They were put together with the old license. I think it was Crash back in the mid-90s. So they were falling apart, but we sounded good. But the only problem was in Fleet Street in Liverpool, where all the bars were, used to walk to work on a Monday morning, all you could just smell was stale alcohol. And it was just like walking through a beater at 3 o'clock in the morning. But we had fun times in Liverpool. It's one of the stations I enjoyed working at, because it was like working for a nightclub on the radio.
I remember Galerxy. It's good. It was a good station.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of, I guess I remember when it first launched as Kiss in '97, and literally within 6 months it changed to Galerxy when Chrysalis had bought the group. And it changed a lot, but it was different. I think if Galerxy was of its time, it wouldn't work now because obviously the music's changed. At the time there was more dance, R&B, house and trance, and it was something different. I mean, Galerxy to start with had major problems. It wasn't bringing the revenue in. It didn't have the ratings as well. Then eventually it all changed over. They brought in a new breakfast show. It became more mainstream dance and R&B rather than what I call club kind of dance, where it's so limited to a niche audience. So it turned itself around. But yeah, right time, right place. And obviously now it's Capital. And, people talk about, Galerxy be great, but actually what you've got is Galerxy just reborn. It has to reinvent itself. Stations can't continue doing the same thing, especially when you're aiming at a young audience, because the music changes. You can't be a dance station, because if there's no dance coming through coming through the charts and coming through, then you're limited to what you do. So you have to go mainstream.
Yeah, I also remember the last ever Galaxy link.
Yeah, I mean, it was all kind of sad. Obviously, with global, they do their transitions from capitalists come in, etc., and that's how you rebrand radio stations. And I've been part of many rebrands over the years where you put the effort into killing off the radio station and then reinventing a new one. And it's no different from back in I suppose it was the early 90s when Pennine FM in Bradford relaunched as the Pulse, and exactly the same thing. And them days to relaunch a radio station was very, very rare. No one ever did it before. I think the first station to get relaunched probably was Radio T's in Middlesbrough, relaunched as TFM. And a few stations in the 80s got relaunched when they got merged, like CBC and GB Radio in Newport and Cardiff got relaunched as Red Dragon. So it was still in the 90s to relaunch a radio station was a very rare thing. But nowadays it's not anymore because it's all part of a group. So people do it because originally a station was losing audience, it wasn't getting the revenue through. So if it wasn't working, you rebranded, you relaunched it, changed its name, as I suppose you would call it. So for Capital and Galaxy, it was a natural progression to be part of a group. And now that was over 10, 11 years ago when it launched in Leeds and Yorkshire, and it hasn't looked back ever since.
Have you been inside the old Jacob's Well, I think it's called, or Joseph's Well building?
Joseph's Well, yeah. I mean, I was there when it originally was Galerxy, and obviously it's changed. And like most radio stations, they have a refurb and change things around. But yeah, now obviously it's part of with Heart and Communicorp are leasing parts of their studio from there as well. So yeah, it's different. But most radio stations now are not what they used to be. When I got into radio, when I was a tech op at Radio Air in Leeds in the early 90s, we had Radio Air, we had Magic going out, we had 2 radio stations 24/7. It was a busy place. Now it's literally just one show coming out of a building with a journo who's there in the mornings, and that's kind of it. It's a shame, really, but the world has changed. Technology has changed things, and with COVID, it's made it even more what's happening now quicker than it would have been over the next 4 to 5 years.
And also it's coming down, and also it's just, as I say, it's just down the road. Capital, sorry, for the global building is just down the road from Radio Air.
Yeah, I guess that was just a coincidence. Like most places, radio stations go where the best location is and what they can afford for rent and so on and so forth. I think the same thing happened actually in Birmingham, where Galaxy Heart, when they moved from their other place, the new place on Broad Street, was very down. I think literally was about 2 minutes walk around the corner from Free Radio. So yeah, that's sometimes happens when buildings get close with each other.
Have you been inside the Galaxy buildings Capital since the Heart moved in Heart?
Oh, I haven't. Last time I was at Capital would have been about 11 years ago when they had the refurb and they changed the studios over, but I haven't been in since then, no.
And also Kiss used to be owned by EMAP.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the first franchise. So they had Kiss, Leeds and Manchester, which was a franchise from EMAP, and it was owned by Phase, which was a consortium of different radio groups. They just basically franchised the name. They paid to have the name Kiss. So obviously, when Chrysalis had bought Phase, Manchester and Leeds, obviously they were concerned with EMAP, and they said, "Well, that's fine. You can have our Kiss name. It's going to cost you lots and lots of money." And Chrysalis said, "No, we're not going to pay that." So EMAP said, "Okay, that's fine. Well, you've got 7 days to get rid of the Kiss name." And that's why literally the station got rebranded in 7 days to Galaxy, because Chrysalis had already owned Galaxy in Bristol. So the name already existed. They already had the package in. So they literally had 7 days to relaunch a radio station, which was, I think, one of the fastest ever relaunches in history.
And the last ever song on Galaxy and the last ever link was an Andy Durant, I think his name was.
Yeah, I don't think that link was actually planned. I think he must have been clubbing that night before and literally just gone into the radio station at I don't know, 5 a.m. and just hijack the radio station. But it was nice to be done. Probably not officially done by the board, but hey, these things happen.
And he played Goldie in A City Life to end Galaxy.
But no, he summed up Galaxy really well. I mean, Galaxy was of its time. It was your younger brother, your best friend. It was a soundtrack to the clubs and the music of the time, and it was. And Galaxy, I've never known a station where you could turn up and the whole world was there as well. I plenty of friends who worked at Galaxy who did nightclub gigs, and literally they'd be there, and the whole world and its dog would be there. It was just an incredible radio station with an amazing following, and everything they did was perfect. It was angled at the audience, and it worked. And a lot of stations have tried to emulate that, but never come very close to it.
I also nowadays listen to more talk radio format, like talk radio.
Yeah, I think what's changed over the years, especially for me, is that historically you put a radio station on, it was trying to please everyone by playing music from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and bit of this, bit of that. Well, now actually, because our life is living on our iPhones and computers, you can listen to radio stations by your mood. I've got DAB in the car, and to me, I listen to a lot of LBC News, sometimes 5 Live. But again, if I'm in the weekends, I might listen to Heart Dance. If I like my 80s, I'll put the 80s on. So it just depends. I don't listen to mainstream radio as I did 10, 20 years ago, because the stations playing music are what I want to be listening to. But if I'm in an 80s mood, I'll put Heart 80s on, or Absolute, or History if I want some from Club Classic. So to me, I listen by the mood I'm in now, rather than being told what I need to listen to.
Yeah, and also there's a lot of good radio stations out there, and radio has changed in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years.
I when I ran Q Radio in Northern Ireland, we were a station of 8 licenses merged together, a bit like what Heart did. And we used to do focus groups in and around the country. Literally, we'd rock up in a hotel for an evening, play audio, talk to listeners about their views, and you soon realise that the world has changed. As I said, we live off our mobile phones. If you want pop music 40 years ago, you had to listen to Radio 1 or your radio station, or you bought your cassette or your vinyl. Well, now I can listen to any song, any artist within literally 20 seconds by going onto YouTube or Spotify. So it's changed. So radio stations have to adapt. They have to have great content. The music has to be right, because if not, there's so many stations. I mean, especially down here in London, we have probably about 5 different multiplexes, and most of them are global or Bauer stations. But I can choose from probably 100 radio stations on the DAB. Not saying any of them are any good, but it's still, I still have a choice. I guess it's the same thing if you've got Sky and you've got satellite. There's probably 300 TV channels on Sky, but actually, how many of them do you actually watch? Probably not many. You probably have 5 or 10 which you go to, and it's like with radio stations. There may be 100 stations down here in the London area, but actually there's only probably 5 I go to as my presets, because the rest of them I don't care, I'm not interested about, because they're all doing the same thing. So it's the ones who are doing something different and stand out get my attention.
Yeah, and as you say, in London area, there's a Globals building as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's that. I mean, when we ran Q in Belfast, we merged stations together, because you don't need to be, having 15, 20 different buildings. Why in London, I mean, historically you had Capital, Heart, LBC. I mean, the building at Global have got. Why do you need 7 different buildings? It makes no sense. It's a business. You put it into one building, you're saving on staffing costs, electrical, engineering, the whole lot. And it's no different what's going on with Bauer in Yorkshire. And the Radio Air building, as it is in Leeds, now houses 3 radio stations. And absolutely, why would you spend money on rent for 3 places? It makes no sense. And I think a lot of people who can say, "Oh, radio's changing." Well, actually, yeah, it has changed, but it's a business. I remember when I worked at SGR in Ipswich, we'd just been taken over by the GWR group. And I'll never forget one of the directors coming along to give a talk, and he says, "We're no different from a football club or a hotel." And it's true. A radio station is no different from McDonald's or the Hilton Hotel. It's a business to make money and are a service provider. And radio stations have to keep costs down. They have to make a profit, because if not, they'll go out of business. And perhaps it's gone a bit too far now with regulation, whereas networking, and we've got rid of local programming. But actually, at the end of the day, a friend of mine said it's not fair. You got, what getting rid of all these local shows. Well, actually, if you're anyone can set up a national radio station nowadays. It's very easy to do it if you got the money. So if I'm setting up a national radio station, being like a McDonald's for everybody, and I've got a Viking FM in Hull, which has to do certain criteria, it makes it unplain playing field. It's uneven. So the only way you can make it easy for everybody, if you say, okay, well, you get rid of all the rules, then it's a clear pitch for everybody. And it's a shame, but that's the way life is. And nowadays, anyone can set up a radio station, whether it's on DAB or online. I think the issue is people kind of forget that radio isn't just FM anymore. Radio, it can be anywhere on your platform. People will listen in the cars, on their phones, via their TV, Freeview. So it's FM is just another platform for broadcasters.
Yeah, and that's brilliant, and it brings the game forward. Like at the moment, we've got, because some radio stations have made TV channels as well.
Yeah, it's an extension of their brand, and Global did that a couple of years ago with Capital and Heart TV, etc. But I think they kind of realised actually the viewing figures for these are so small against the cost of running it. It is no point doing it, because at the end of the day, what Capital TV or Heart doing, it's like, you know what, it's the same as everybody else. It's what I say to clients, radio stations, presenters. What are you doing differently? And actually, when it comes down to it, not everyone can be a McDonald's. The burger may be fine, but at the end of the day, you can't emulate somebody who's doing it successfully well. And I know a lot of radio stations try and beat other radio stations, but you can never beat the best.
Yeah. Question 2: who were your inspirations in broadcasting growing up?
Oh God, that's probably a mixture of different people. I grew up. To me, it was Viking in '84 when it launched. Got me in the radio bug, I guess. So for me, the person I listened to at breakfast was a guy called Dave Fewster. As a kid, I suppose I had influence from him. I used to love, and actually I've become really good friends with him over the years. He used to do the evening show on Viking back in the early 80s, Andy Hollins. He used to bring his dog into work, I remember that. So I think when I finally crafted my professionalism, I use that term loosely, as a presenter, it's a cross between a few presenters. So I think it was probably, I suppose in mid-90s when I was at Union Hull, Steve Jordan was doing the afternoon show on Viking. I kind of liked his style of presenting. Simon Logan was on Breakfast on Viking. I kind of liked his style. One of my good friends, Steph Hurst, I was a massive fan because the show, when they were on the Pulse, became so kind of off the wall, what I call a kiddie show. I like that. So I think when I first got into radio, professionally in '96, I suppose I was a hybrid of about 5 different presenters, so it probably wasn't the best. But I think you find your own way, and that's one thing. I think it's easy to copy somebody, but I think, as I say, and we'll talk about this later, but it's easy to be yourself and use bits of other presenters, but don't be them, because they will be them and you're them. So yeah, just use hints and tips of presenters, but don't copy them, because it works to be a bit of a disaster, as I found out.
And you're also forgetting from that list a guy who did a bit of work with Radio Humberside as well, Neil Rudd.
Yeah, I mean, Rudders, I was when I was at Radio Air in the early 90s as a tech op, playing out the tapes of pre-recorded shows and live CD shows. Neil was doing overnights and was the swing presenter at the time. So yeah, Neil just came in from Leeds, and so 2 Leeds from Hull, to do kind of cover shows, and that's how I knew Neil. And in radio, everyone knows each other. It's so incestuous, because you work with people, they know their friends, and you meet their friends, and next minute it's like, oh yeah, I know so and so, and it's a weird game. But yeah, so yeah, growing up, I think as a inspirations, there was quite a few, but they were just people I liked and got ideas from, but I never copied to the extent.
And someone else who's been a guest on this previous podcast, Glenn Pinder, as well.
Yeah, Glenn was at Radio Air. I mean, remember, and I think it was probably late 90s. One of the presenters, Carl Kingston, he used to do some voicing work for me when I was at the Bay in Lancaster making adverts. And I used to go to Radio Air to pick up some tapes from Carl. And Glenn was there, and Glenn was trying to get into radio as well. It's an interesting way you look back at people, how they try to get in, and next minute they're in. But it's all fun.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, one of my inspirations, as we mentioned off recording, off camera, Tony Blackburn as well.
Tony, when I worked at Q in Belfast, we launched our new station studios in the centre of Belfast, which was a great experience for me to spend lots of money on a brand new kit, which was brilliant. And we were looking for someone to open up the station. So we actually thought about Tony Blackburn. Nothing to do with the area, but it was more of an anarchy self-indulgence. So Tony was great when he came to Belfast to open up our new studio complex.
Do you have a story about him?
Have I story? No, to be honest, I don't. I mean, Tony's so nice. There's nothing I could say about Tony, which is, totally. He's just a great person, and he hasn't changed. He's still the same he was back in the 60s.
Previous guests have told me that in meetings at radio stations, he used to be the comedian in the meetings, if you can believe that.
I can believe that. I've got some tapes of him on Capital Gold back in the early 90s, and literally he was cracking. I wouldn't say they were jokes; they weren't even funny. But yeah, Tony does that. He just cracks some little one-liners, and it's like, yeah, okay, Tony, thanks for that. Play the hits. But yeah, no, great guy.
Yeah, and also he, what was it? He's also I found a picture of him, Neil Fox, Tarrant, and Tommy Vance.
Tommy Vance, yeah.
Yeah,
no, the a great team, and Capital Gold was, I guess, the reincarnation of Radio 1 back in the mid-90s, and it was full of the ex-Radio 1 pirate presenters. But that's, that was the time of the 90s when you had gold stations, when stations split AM and FM. But yeah, Tony was good.
And then it became Capital Gold, obviously.
Yeah, Capital Gold was like one of the first bunch of stations which split, which for people who don't know, back in the late 80s, the IBA, as it was before it became the Radio Authority and Ofcom, radio stations broadcast on AM and FM. And a lot of the stations, were told back in the early 90s, use it or lose it. That's why stations split. And Viking was one of the first to split in October 88. It was Viking FM and Viking Gold. Radio Air became Air FM and Magic, and so on and so forth. And Capital used to do weekends where on FM it was called CFM, and they did weekends called Capital Gold. And then eventually they split fully, and it was just, they had to, the stations didn't want to lose their medium wave frequency because a lot of listeners were still listening on medium wave at the time, which now looking back at it seems archaic. But then this was, 30 odd years ago, where there was no DAB, there was no internet. So, stations, why would stations lose basically half a leg? So they created two radio stations, an oldies radio station, and an FM became the youthy station. Quite a lot of stations split. I mean, in Liverpool, they split a talk station. They launched City FM and City Talk, but City Talk was costing us a fortune to run back in the 90s, and they changed it to Radio City Gold. And there's quite a few. I mean, Piccadilly made a dreadful mistake when they split in 88. They launched Key 103, which was like an adult rock station, and put Piccadilly on medium wave, and the station on FM, Key 103, just died on its arse because they were playing songs which no one ever heard before. There's album tracks. They were trying to be different, but it didn't work. Air FM was another one, looking back at it, because Radio Air was successful. When Radio Air split in July 90, a lot of the Radio Air presenters had gone to medium wave, onto Magic. So a lot of the listeners have followed them onto Magic, and Air FM had launched as this kind of hot rocking station and playing 5 songs in a row, and no one wanted it. And, looking back at it, they were ahead of the time. What works now didn't work in the 90s, and what worked in the 90s would never work now. So yeah, it was a fascinating time in the 90s growing up in radio, because the stations are split. We kind of launched into the kind of new pop stations, and they became more Americanized as well.
There's also as well the Quayside Quarry as well, because that's where Key 103 used to be broadcast, and Magic.
Yeah, I mean, they originally were the Piccadilly Plaza in the centre of Manchester, and that was a polite way of saying it, a god almighty shopping centre from the 70s, which was derelict. And there was this radio station just plonked to the top of this escalator. I remember going there to get car stickers and buy merchandise, and it was a horrible place. They moved from there. But yeah, I mean, now it's become broadcast centres. You don't need to be everywhere. You can be anywhere you want in the world now to do radio stations. It's nice to be in your area so you can talk about it, but it's different. So yeah, there's a lot of history with commercial radio in the last 30 to 40 years.
And the Capital and Heart station in Manchester confuses me because I look at the address and it's nowhere in sight, and there's big buildings.
Yeah, I mean, when radio first began, you had a receptionist. I remember going to Viking in Hull, and they had a receptionist, and you could pop in there, get your car stickers, buy your T-shirts, and so on. But now it's different. It's just in an office block where no one really goes to a radio station. Not anymore as we used to. I suppose they might have clients going there, but yeah. When I went to Heart and Capital in Birmingham many years ago, that originally was in a great building on, I think it was on Broad Street, what I remember, and then they moved to this office block, and it's like on the 7th floor. But it's about keeping costs down. That's what it's about.
One of
now.
their presenters, I think, was Andy Twigg, I think.
Yeah, I think he was. Was he? I think at Capital in Nottingham, Trent FM. I remember. Yeah.
And now he does BBC Radio Derby Breakfast.
Yeah, quite a lot of presenters have left commercial radio and gone on to the BBC. I guess it's the natural progression forward if there's availability for the presenter, but that's few and far between. But the industry has changed a lot now, and you can't be a presenter all your life. It's a difficult industry to be in, especially if you want to make money, because in radio you don't make much money.
I know some people I know, some presenters who I know have either cut back or took a moment to take a time out of radio.
Yeah, it's difficult, especially over the last number of years where stations have amalgamated, merged, or been networked from anywhere in the UK. You get to a point in your life where you go, well, actually, I can't do this anymore. A lot of presenters, especially if they're married or settled down and got a house somewhere, before you could get any job anywhere you wanted in Yorkshire. Well, now you can't. You have to go somewhere, whether it's the Midlands or London or Scotland. And if you've got a family, you can't do that anymore. It's not that easy. And I guess it's the closest analogy is like being a footballer. There's only so many years you can play for Hull City or Man United. So eventually you have to get to you become a coach, or you start to being part of the management team.
Yeah, some of your YouTube stuff helped me in my radio broadcast stuff, so thank you.
That's good. It's good to give advice and help people out. And I mean, especially at the moment, a lot of people ask me, how do you get into radio? How do I get to this? How do I do that? And the answer to that 20 years ago was a lot easier than it is now, and it's not easy. But I think also people have changed when it comes to radio. When I first got into radio back in the early 90s or the 80s, when I was as a kid growing up, it's all I wanted to do. But now people want to be YouTube bloggers. People want to do podcasts. It's different. Radio is, I think, not as popular as it was 40 years ago because there's so much out there now. And people can sit in their bedrooms, record videos on their phone and make money from it, where actually in radio, you couldn't do it from your home 40 years ago, and you couldn't make any money out of it then.
And also I want to do multimedia type stuff.
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. And for me, when I got into radio, it was tape machines, cartridge players, and that was it. And you couldn't do anything at home. There was, you didn't have a computer. If you had a computer at home, it was for printing and making Word documents. It wasn't doing much more than that, really. So now you can create a radio station in your house quite easily with all the equipment. It's not difficult. You can broadcast from your home, through COVID. It's proven it. A lot of presenters from the BBC and national stations have rocked up at home with connectivity back to the station. So, I think radio back in the 90s and the 80s and so on was an art form. Being able to put a show together with tapes, records, cartridges, and back time. There was no computers. It was all done on pen and paper and your head. There wasn't formatted radio stations as there was now, so you could play what you want, you could talk where you wanted. And I think, to put a show together, and that's what people said to me, what got me into radio. And I look back at this, and I know exactly what I got into radio for, because it was the sound of the radio station. It was the art form of putting a show together, making it sound slick, doing segues manually with vinyl or CD and a cartridge with the jingle in between. So if it went wrong, it would go horribly wrong. You couldn't really rehearse it. You could only rehearse half the link, because obviously the song was played to start with. So, to put a show together on the radio station back in the 80s and 90s, it was a big task. And now it's very easy. You literally press next. Most computer playout systems, the segue is already done for you. You can make them a bit tighter, but it's already done. It's a different situation. So, when I got into radio, you had to know what the hell you were doing. Now, literally, you can say that was this is, mention the website and a few songs about Beyonce and Lady Gaga and press next, and that's it. It's not difficult, but actually, it's difficult coming up with good content now, and that's the thing which I find interesting when I listen to a lot of radio stations. That a lot of presenters can't come up with content. They have no life experience, and for me, I want to listen to a presenter who interests me, who engages me, who talks about things. Going, I don't know about that. Rather than that was this is, and here's Lady Gaga. It's like, yeah, great, thanks for that. Perhaps it's an age I'm getting to now where I want someone to entertain me, not bore me.
Yeah, and we also, my station, use Myriad.
Yeah, I've used Myriad. When we were in Belfast, we had Zeta RCS, and we used to split 9 ways. We had split adverts, split jingles, split links, and we split everything, and I used to love that. So yeah, they all do the same thing, but it's like a car. Some of them are smooth, like a BMW, and some of them are ropey, like an older, I was going to say a brand of a car, but I won't, but you get the gist.
Renault Laguna.
Yes, we'll go with the Renault Laguna. I'm sure they're really good cars.
Yeah, because they're also, as well, because I made an error the other day as well. I forgot to put the fader up when I was talking live.
Oh, it's no good. No one can hear what you're talking about.
Yeah,
No good
my
at all.
error. You might have had them moments in radio.
Oh, there's plenty of times where you're pressing next and realize the fade has gone down. Or I think one time I remember when I worked at SGR in Ipswich, we had a sister station called SGR Colchester, and they were doing their own evening show because we used to be networked from 6 o'clock at night. And remember on the desk listening to their transmitter because we were playing the same songs literally side by side. And I remember listening to that station for some reason and forgot I was monitoring Colchester. So I opened up the microphone and go, SGR FM, it's Saturday night, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, can't hear myself. And I stopped talking. I realised I couldn't hear myself because on my cans, I had SGR Colchester on, not our own Ipswich service. So you do daft things and, pressing wrong buttons, and it's very easy. But I think to me, being a radio presenter stroke tech op is like driving a car. Once you know what you're doing, it's fine, but you have to stop and think. What I used to say to presenters who were training them up in tech ops, ask the question, what am I doing next? Okay, I'm doing that. I need to do that. So a lot of it is just thinking, but things happen, mistakes happen. It's life. And as they say in radio, no one dies.
True. Question 3, what is your favourite part about the job?
When I was in radio full time, it was putting a show together and making it sound slick, having great calls, and making it just sound as big as possible. That's when I was in radio as a presenter. When I moved into management, it's making the station again sound polished and sound good by having great presenters, great production, and also being part of the station, which became number one in the radar or wherever it was in the table. But for me, it was part of just the excitement of putting things together. I think I was very fortunate when I was group program controller of Q Radio in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I was in a situation where we relaunched the radio station when we bought from City Beat to Q. I moved the radio station to brand new premises. I took the radio station breakfast shows and drive shows around the world doing outside broadcasts. I put together a 3-day radiothon, which was great. That took a lot of work doing that. So I achieved a lot in Northern Ireland. So I think to me, despite Northern Ireland's a great place to be and interesting place sometimes, I achieved a lot in my career, and I think putting a radio station together, which then became number 2 in the marketplace, was fun. My other big accolade was when I ran Pennine in Huddersfield, which I kind of I suppose I was given it. I what's the word I'm looking for? Accumulated it, I suppose. But that kind of lasted about 18 months from a financial point of view. But when I owned Pennine, I programmed the music, I presented, I made the adverts, I did the production, I cleaned the toilets. When you get a station which sounds absolutely amazing, we even had the same processing settings as galerxy, which was fantastic. We sounded huge. So yeah, there's certain things I enjoy, but to me, it's the end product. When you plan things out, when you hear it on the radio, that excites me. That's what I like about the job. My job at the moment is working in PR and comms. I put together content for Sky News, BBC News, and 5 Live, and all the big national networks. So when you hear certain interviews or watch stuff on TV, it's like, that's come from me, which I enjoy. And my radio career now is weekends working for a station which was one of our competitors when I worked in Belfast, Juice, which is basically a hybrid of Capital and Kiss, I guess, in a way. So I do weekend breakfast for them, but I just do that as my kind of weekend now, just to do some keep my hand in and help the guys out.
It's good doing that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's not. It's literally 5 links an hour. It's not much talking. I do it because it's just nice to do it. But I think it's like, as I said, it's like being a footballer to me. Once you've played lots of football matches, you've been in the World Cup and you've been in the UEFA Cup. After a while, you know what? I'm just going to go and play for Scunthorpe United instead.
Yeah, and it's one of my favourite parts about the radio is getting, when we're allowed, getting guests in the studio, hearing their stories, because that's what my aim is in the thingy. Get as many guests on this podcast as I possibly can, just to hear their different stories about their different careers and stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's actually quite nice to hear what people do and how they got into radio. There's a great podcast, guy called David Lloyd, who's been in the radio game a long time. He does interviews about people's lives and how they got into radio and their journey. And it's fascinating listening to people's stories from as a kid growing up to how they got where they are and how things changed and how their life had gone from one there to another and how the company and the business had changed. So I think it's always good to talk to people and listen to them and get advice. And being in radio, you hear people's stories, and again, it depends on your subject matter, but you could be talking to somebody who's just lost their loved one to somebody who's won £1 million, and people have advice and stories they can talk to you about.
He's definitely going on my list.
Definitely.
Question 4: how has COVID affected your life and line of work?
For me, hasn't changed dramatically, because my job, my daytime job, despite we were in the office in central London, has always been computer based and phone based. So for me, working at home, there was no real difference. When we do we call them radio days, so when we have celebrity guests doing interviews across the network, that became Zoom or FaceTime rather than ISDN. So for me, it's been easier to work from home. From a broadcasting point of view, nothing changed because I was still doing the stuff via remote anyway for the radio station in Northern Ireland. So that had no change at all for me. But for my daytime job, it's kind of made it easier. And I kind of like it. I don't have to get up early. I don't have to get a train to London. I save an absolute fortune on train travel instead. So I think what's happened from the broadcasting side of it now has probably happened 5 years earlier than it would have done. A lot of stations, especially the BBC, are now living off FaceTime or Zoom, and they're quite happy to do that. Sky News, BBC News, you watch Zooms and Skypes, video interviews now. That will continue. I think once we're now into that 18-month where we'll be using it, once we use it, we don't go back. So I think people have realised, I had a conversation with the news editor of ITN a few months ago, and we talked about, will they change the way they do their interviews? And they said if it's a group interview, they'll take a camera crew down to the interview, but if it's a one-to-one like we're talking now, they will continue using Zoom and Skype, because historically they'd have to hire a studio out somewhere, they have an engineer to make sure it all works, and that took time and cost. So actually, why would you, when Zoom quality on broadband and with a HD camera does the job? You don't need to have everything else. And unfortunately, Buggles sang a song back in the late 70s called "Video Killed the Radio Star," but computers and phones have revolutionized the way we do our work now.
Yeah, I still like going into the old studio, and I'm hoping to allow guests back very soon.
I'm sure it will be. I'm sure in the next couple of months things will get back to some normality, and hopefully by early next year COVID should be a thing of the past, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Because I want to, in the future editions of this podcast, I want to go down to people's locations and interview them from there, get myself a big boom mic.
Exactly, you can do all that. That's the beauty of using mobile phones and software, where you can plug your microphone into your phone with an iPhone, iRig Pre, do that, and then you've got perfect quality. I used to do a lot of my interviews when we were in Northern Ireland for the breakfast shows, literally with a microphone plugged into my iPad. Process it. You can't tell the difference now, and that's the beauty of it. Software is very easy. It's very, very cheap and easy to do these things, rather than historically years ago when it cost you thousands.
Yeah, it's accelerated it, the work from home mantra in radio.
Yeah, I mean, historically, you wouldn't be allowed to do shows from home because it'd be echoey. And well, actually, if you can stick a duvet over your head, I mean, I've got a studio microphone I'm using now, going through my USB mixer into my laptop. But I'm in my living room, so it's bouncing off the walls. But if I was in a small room, you wouldn't be able to tell. It's very well put together with quite reasonably cheap equipment.
Nice. Yeah, wow. Question 5. Last question on the list, by the way. What advice would you give to young aspiring broadcasters who are starting out?
I guess the first question is what do you want to do in radio? Is it production? Is it journalistic? If you want to be a presenter, then the other question would be is about being realistic. I guess the industry's changed a lot, and it's about being what you want to achieve. And I guess historically you started on overnights on commercial radio. They've now all gone. I think if you want to get to Radio 1, it's probably easier now to get to Radio 1 than it was probably in the last 20, 30 years. They're aiming for a younger audience. They want presenters who don't sound commercial, so they're taking people from student radio stations, or probably from smaller commercial stations. I think the advice would be never give up. If you want to go for it, absolutely go for it. Get advice, listen to people, speak to people who are in the industry, whether it's presenters on regional drive shows like at Heart or another local station. I think if you get a chance to join a community station, please do. Advice would be sometimes hopefully go to a station you can where they've got some reasonably professional people working there. Some community stations, dare I say it, sometimes run by egos and people who've never made it. So if you want advice, ask around, seek advice, but listen to other presenters. For me, one of my biggest things was to listen to Galerxy when I first kind of, got into the frame of radio, and listen to how they do the links, and then go, well, do I sound like that? Am I doing the same thing? And if it doesn't sound like them, then obviously not. But I just think listen to speech presenters, music presenters, but keep on knocking on doors and say to programmers, whether it's a big station or a BBC, please, can I have some advice? What do you think of my demo? And it's very easy to get offended. I've been there before where they go, well, we don't like that. I'm not sure about that. And it's like, what? There's nothing wrong with that. And you take offense to it. But I think you have to be open-minded and go, you know what, actually, yes, they're right. I've done demos and people have said to me, I don't like that. And at the time I just thought, what do you know? And looking back at it, yes, they were right. But there's plenty of people out there like myself. So, I have a few people I kind of coach who send me demos every couple of months. I give them advice, and I'm more than happy to receive details and help them out with demos. But yeah, just keep on knocking on doors if it's something you want to do. But I think it's about being realistic in your own mind that the industry has changed a hell of a lot. It's not the same as it was. You can't just rock up at your local commercial station, get an overnight show, because they don't exist anymore. And community stations are the way forward, but they're still finding their feet. They're still trying to know what they're doing when it comes to figures, money, and a format. So be patient, but find out who your local presenter is. When you can, grab a coffee and ask for advice. But don't be put off, because I got into radio by hard work. When I first did it I was 16. I didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to go to uni, but Vikings program controller, a guy called Steve King, sent me a lovely letter saying, go and get life experience. You're not going to walk into Capital at the age of 16 unless you're an absolutely amazing presenter. It doesn't happen. But I think, it was literally just putting demos together, getting experience. And also, I think as radio goes, you can't just be a presenter. Can you edit music? Can you make producing? Can you do things? Can you do voice things? So I think nowadays, rocking up to a radio station, say, well, I can do that. And I've always been fortunate when I've worked at every single station. I know the radio station back to front. I know how the racks room works. I know how the technology works. I know how computers work. So when it comes down to it, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Rather than going, I can't do that. John Myers, I read his book, late great John Myers, amazing programmer, broadcaster. He put in his book, when he worked in radio back in probably the 80s, I think he worked at BBC Carlisle in Cumbria. He was asked, John, can you cover the country and western show? Yeah, I can do that. Never done a country show in his life before, but I think obviously certain things you can't admit to do, but if you think you can do it, then go for it. Never say no to anything in radio, and throw yourself in there, get yourself a good demo and a portfolio of stuff you can do, but go for it. But yeah, never say never, because some people will get a knock back and think that's it, I'm not doing it, never again. But keep on knocking on that door, because as I say, if you keep on knocking on the door, someday somebody will answer it.
And also, sorry, before we finish, I need to apologise for the week before last when I went live. Sorry about that. It was my first time going live, so
that's good. You learn by it, and you realise what works and what doesn't work.
And I didn't want any podcast to distract me and be on my brain on that day, so sorry.
No problem. But thank you for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Do join me again very soon for another podcast. But for now, please give it up for Jonathan Gould.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for listening. And that's a wrap.
That was my interview with Jonathan Gould. Hope you really enjoyed it. Hope it filled a gap in your time. Hope you're having a good day. One more upload to come with broadcaster Simon Green. So, talk then, BL out.